So next topic, social conditioning. Social conditioning, what is it? Essentially, we all have grown up with a certain idea of the world, and the people around us, and women in particular, have grown up with a certain idea of the world. And this is very critical in dictating what we assign value to, how we interpret various things, how we view romantic relationships, what we expect other people to do in a relationship, those kind of things. So we'll talk about what social conditioning is and where it comes from, and then we'll talk about what social conditioning we might have and how we can sort of overcome it. And also what the girls' social conditioning is and how we can overcome that, okay? So first off, what is social conditioning and where does it come from? Well, we obviously all live in a society, and every society has certain rules, regulations, restrictions, expectations. That's what makes it a society. We have like sort of implied social contracts, right? Like there's an implied social contract right now between me and you that I won't run up and spit in your face right now. So there's an implied social contract. If I did that, everyone in this room would probably consider me weird, right? It's an expectation, right? And every society has slightly different expectations, but those expectations have led that society to survive and thrive, okay? So for example, I'll give you an interesting one. This is, if anybody is of a religion that doesn't eat pork, you can disregard this or treat it however you like, but I'm gonna explain things this way. There is a restriction in certain religions about eating pork, right? Now, if you were to look at that restriction nowadays, is there any strong reason why not eating pork would help people survive or not survive or prosper or not prosper in life? Probably not very much, probably not. However, if you look 5,000 years ago, when certain religions were started, that may be too far back, 2,000, 3,000 years ago when certain religions were started, there were a lot lower standards for healthy meat back then. And pork, pigs, were an animal that would develop diseases and have unhealthy meat more often than other animals, okay? So if, say for example, you subscribe to a religion that said don't eat pork, then you don't eat pork, you have a lower incidence of foodborne illness, you on average live longer, you on average have more offspring, and that religion spreads. Does that make sense? And this is an idea that's called memetics. Right, you guys have heard genetics, that's the spread of genes. Memetics is the spread of memes, the spread of ideas. Okay? And so the idea with memetics, similar to genetics, is it's not necessarily the correct idea that will spread, but it's the idea that has survival and replication value. Okay? So what I just gave you there, the pork idea, in ancient times had a very high memetic value. Right? It actually helped the people in its society survive. Okay? Another idea that's very interesting in terms of memetic value is this idea of like women and children first, right? That's an interesting one. Like if you're evacuating like a sinking ship, there's this like women and children first, get them on the lifeboats first. Now, why would that exist memetically? Well, if you look at a society back in the day, let's say that a society goes to war and they lose a third of their population, okay? So let's say they had 50 men and they have 50 women. Okay, and let's say they could lose a third of their population. They could either lose 33 men or they could lose 33 women. If they lost the 33 men, these, what would it be, 17 men left could definitely impregnate 50 women and get a nice solid next generation going. However, if they lost 33 women, they would be left with 17 women who could have kids for the next generation. That'd be a much more catastrophic blow to their survival as a society, okay? And so, whereas I wouldn't say that like women are more important than men or women are better than men, it does make sense from a societal standpoint, especially in times when there were like drastic death events going on, it does make sense to protect your women as a society. Because without them, it's very hard to keep that society going, right? So that's another memetic idea, this idea of like chivalry, take care of the women, that kind of stuff. And it has survival value memetically. So there's all these different ideas in society. Some of them were smart, some of them were dumb. A lot of them may have been smart in the past, but are currently dumb. And there may be ones that were dumb in the past that are now currently smart. Who knows, all right? But we do have this collection of ideas that makes up society. And a lot of them are given to us without us really knowing why, okay? So think of societal conditioning as something that it was handed down to you, and on average, probably more often than not, it's good rather than bad, right? Because there was some reason, there was some value behind it. However, it's not something so smart that it should be like questioned, like it should be accepted without question, okay? It needs to be questioned. You need to actually make your own decisions and think. And then that's absolutely critical. And you also have to think about, where does social conditioning come from? Okay, it comes from a few different sources. Well, obviously it comes from society, films, teachers, parents, all those kind of things, right? But it comes from two categories of sources. It comes from, well, actually maybe three. Let's say it comes from smart sources first. Let's not be completely, I was going to ignore this one. It can come from smart sources, for sure. It can come from ignorant sources. And it can come from manipulative sources. Right? Smart source would be something like, if someone tells you not to, stick metal things in an electrical outlet, that's probably coming from someone who tried it before, they have experience, they're telling you not to do it. You don't have to do that a bunch of times yourself to figure it out. Or don't put your hand flat on a burning stove. You probably want to take that. It's coming from a smart source, and a mistake you shouldn't repeat. And actually, it is important to learn from others and not repeat the mistakes of others. So you do want to accept a lot of social conditioning. A lot of social conditioning is good information, right? If you had to learn everything from scratch, you'd be in big trouble. However, it also comes from other sources. It can come from ignorant sources. For example, again, we said earlier, most guys throughout history didn't have a lot of success with women. And actually, most guys today don't have a lot of success with women. So if you start taking advice from random guys who you know on how to be successful with women, what are the odds that it's going to be really good advice? Not the greatest, right? And it's not that those people have bad intentions, they just don't know any better, right? Or it may be that your parents may have taught you to, be quiet, mind your manners, fit in, and that's actually very useful in certain contexts, but it might not be so useful in a social context of meeting women. It might actually hurt you in that context, all right? So one is an example of actually bad information. Another is an example of information that may be good in one context but is bad in other contexts, okay? But again, the point is, it either could be coming from an ignorant source or it's not applicable, so don't blindly accept it, all right? You need to think about what you're doing. Finally, can come from a manipulative source, right? And an example of this would be, for example, do you think that a government does a better job of surviving and not being overthrown if it encourages people to believe in the mantras of the government and be peaceful and respect authority? Or do you think it does better if it encourages chaos and tons of free thought, et cetera, right? Just for the survival value of the people in charge, there is a certain reason why they would want you not to think certain ways. And so that sort of stuff could be manipulative. All right, so think about those kind of things as well. Right? Also, I won't go into specifics on one religion or another, but throughout history, there are a lot of religions that have had that kind of stuff as well. Right? So understand that societal conditioning can come from smart sources. So don't throw it all out. Come from ignorant sources, come from manipulative sources. But what you want to do is actually understand what's going on, as opposed to blindly accepting things. You really, really, really do need to think for yourself in terms of social conditioning. Okay, let's take a minute now and think about what are some of the social conditionings that occur between men and women, right? What are some of the social conditionings that you may have grown up with? Anyone? Throw out something that as a kid, maybe you were told that may or may not, may be right, may be wrong, anything like that. Any ideas?
Asking age.
Asking age?
A woman her age, or having to open the door for a woman.
Sure, okay, we'll say that. Opening a door, sure, opening doors. And that would be chivalry, right? Right, chivalry, that type of stuff. That's definitely a societal conditioning kind of thing, right? And you could argue good and bad in some ways, right? In some ways, really good. Society's already talked about protecting the women in society is actually good for society. Also, to be fair, doing nice things for a girl does probably in some ways give her a good experience in life, right? So it's not bad to be nice to someone. However, what are the downsides of chivalry?
Provider.
Puts you in the provider frame, absolutely, for sure. And also it tends to create a dynamic where if you look at like social value, it's kind of like you're at this level of social value and she's at this level of social value, right? And we were talking about what makes a woman attracted to a man. Remember, she's looking for that top 1%. She's not looking for someone that's at a lower social value than her. So while this is nice and kind and generous and caring and giving even, right? And while you could even argue that it is like good for societal stability, you could also argue that you're shooting yourself in the foot with any particular girl when you start acting that way, okay? So that's an example of societal conditioning. It's not bad for society, but if you don't know where it comes from and use it in the right context, it could be bad for you, okay? Yeah, so there's lots of things like this, like pulling out chairs, getting flowers for girls, all those kind of chivalrous type of things. Absolutely. Let's see, other social conditioning things along these lines would be things like club culture, right? The club culture that like the hot girl gets into the club and like the guys don't. And so within the club, the woman has value. So if you accept the frame of the nightclub, you're accepting that frame of lower value. All right, so you want to be very, very careful about those kind of things. Here's another societal conditioning thing that gets in a lot of guys' way. Another societal conditioning thing is, and you get this from like movies and advertising a lot of times, is this idea that you have to be rich, attractive, successful, have the right kind of like car, clothes, etc., right? This is an interesting one, and it's kind of a mixed bag as well, right? So if society is encouraging people to try and be rich, attractive, and successful, that probably is pretty good for society, actually, right? It's encouraging people to work hard. It's encouraging people to, look after their appearance. It's encouraging people to try and be successful. Certainly for car and clothing marketers, this is pretty good. Telling people you need to have the right kind of car, right clothing, that kind of stuff, right? And to a certain extent, you could even argue that the extreme versions of this are honest signals. For example, if you have a Ferrari, that is an honest signal you at least, at one point had a little bit of money to spend, right? So there is even an honest signal value to this. So again, it's not completely ridiculous. However, the problem with these is what? It's logical, and it's based on 21st century stuff rather than evolutionary stuff, okay? So these things, to a certain extent, will trigger a reaction, will trigger some attraction in girls, but they're not really the most effective or direct way to do it, right? That's why you'll see, I get lots of guys on programs, on boot camp all the time that have these things. They're rich, attractive, successful, have the car, have the clothes, and they're like, well, I don't get any girls anymore, or at all, or at least not the types of girls they want, right? And then I'll have other guys come on program. I have guys who, dress badly, smell bad, are like dicks, have very little going for them prospect-wise, but they've hit this emotional, right? They've hit like the emotional switches, and because of that, they're actually relevant to the girl, all right? So again, societal conditioning, not completely wrong, right? If you are an attractive guy and you're rich, you're gonna do better than if you're an attractive guy and poor. Attractive and like if you're a cool guy and successful, sure, that's gonna help you. But when you start pursuing these other things, thinking that it will make up for your lacks in other areas, or thinking that it's the solution to everything, that's where you get yourself into real problems. And that's where guys get really, really disappointed, right? They spend 20 years trying to become this guy on the cover of a magazine. They get there and they realize there's no women in that life. Why? Because they didn't learn the social skills. They didn't do those other things, okay? So again, think about the societal conditioning stuff. And I'm not gonna say again to reject all of it, because a lot of it is good. However, think for yourself. Here's another thing too, which is short-term, long-term on this. So let's say that, let's take me 15 years ago. So I'm an 18-year-old, I'm just going to college, right? This is when I started in the game. At this point, 18-year-old me, am I rich? No. Am I attractive? Kind of. I was a college soccer player. I'm in good shape, but I kind of had acne. I wasn't the most stylish. I didn't know what I was doing yet. So I'm like, we'll say like even, maybe, kind of attractive. Successful? Not really yet. I'm going to a good school, but like not really. Do I have car, clothes, etc.? No, I came from like a, I was actually at my school because I was academically smart. I actually went to school with a lot of people that came from richer places than me. So compared to everybody else, I was pretty low on that totem pole too, right? So I didn't have a lot going for me back then, right? If I were to buy into all these things and I were to try and get girls, I'd be like, well, I'm not as rich as the kids I go to school with. I'm as attractive as some, not that successful yet, don't have the car and clothes. I'd be like, I give up. I can't compete. Who cares, right? So here's another really interesting concept for game and for life, which is if you can't do anything about it right now, don't worry about it, right? If I'm gonna go approach a girl, I'm 18 years old, I'm gonna go approach a girl, can I make myself more rich before the approach? Can't do it? Okay, then rich doesn't matter. Fuck it. Girls don't care about rich guys. Can I make myself more attractive before the approach? Not unless there's a mirror there and I can fix my hair real fast, but probably not, right? Can't do it? Okay, doesn't matter. Can I make myself more successful before the approach? No, can't do it. Can I change my clothes before the approach? Probably not. Can I get a new car? Probably not. All right. So even if these things do matter, to me at that moment, there's no point in having them matter because there's nothing I can do about them, right? Similarly, if I were a rich guy, I still couldn't make myself richer before the approach, still can't make myself more attractive before the approach, etc. So while these may be things to aspire to in the long run, in any given moment, there's no point in buying into that societal conditioning. And that's actually true for a lot of that stuff, right? And that's where this like sort of paradox of do looks matter, does like getting in the gym matter? Yeah, it matters in the long run, but don't be that guy that has to look good before you go talk to a girl or has to like get jacked before you talk to a girl, all right? Because there's nothing you can do about it in that moment. So a lot of times the societal conditioning stuff and becoming an overall better person by either society standards or better yet your own standards is very important, but it isn't important in the moment of that interaction.